Welcome to the YCA Career Catalyst. Today we will talk about crafting an artist statement and how the artist statement is a great tool to focus all of your musical activities. It can help you create a bio or a website, and it can help align your energy around the things that give you the most passion for your music making. David Srebnik spent more than 30 years as a radio announcer and program director for classical music. His most recent posting was as Director of Programs for Sirius XM and their two classical channels. For the last 4 years, David has created a consultancy called All Art is Personal. His mission is to help performers, composers, and institutions learn how to better tell their stories and connect with their audiences. Reading from David's website, he writes, "I am an advocate for classical music performers, ensembles, and composers whose artistry I admire and love. They are artists who have also chosen to be activists and role models for all communities and people, especially those who have little or no access to the power and beauty of classical music. I devote my time to finding ways for these artists to stand out and stand apart from others in our current, overcrowded media and cultural environment. That includes building and enhancing your public profile, making stronger connections with media, venues, and other influencers, strategic planning, and concert program curation." David has worked with musicians at the Curtis Institute, the Sphinx Organization, Young Concert Artists, and with artists such as Anthony McGill, Christopher O'Reilly, and Brandon Patrick George. Please enjoy the conversation. David, what is an artist statement?
An artist statement, I think, formerly has been thought of as a mission statement or a vision statement, something that talks about what the company or organization stands for. I call it an artist statement because all art is personal, all art is emotional, and all art comes from the heart. So by calling it an artist statement, it allows people to really speak about who they are and what they do. So just very basically, it's an answer to as many of these questions as possible. Who are you? What do you do? What do you believe in? What do you hope to become? And what do you love? And from there, you can chart out your day, your week, your month, and bring, I think, tighter focus onto what your career objectives are.
What is the origin of an artist statement?
Well, this is a very interesting question because as you get older, you start recognizing the posts in your life, maybe 30 years ago, that actually stand for something today. So many years ago, I was applying to a position to be a program director and music director at a public radio station. And part of the application process was that we had to come up with an hour of music and then explain why you had chosen each piece. And that's really hard to do because it means you have to ask the why question. Why are you starting with this? Why are you following with this? So that really developed into the idea of before you can answer any of these why questions, whether it's as a program director or as the principal flute player, you have to know who you are and what you do, what you believe in, what you stand for, and what do you love. And it all started there.
Can you give us an example of some artist statements to ground us in this?
Let me just start with mine and see where this goes. I'm a creative advisor and advocate for musicians, composers, performers, ensembles that I love and admire. These are also performers and composers who believe in serving the world, using their music to serve humanity. It could be in their community, it could be in their state, it could be nationwide. They show up where they're needed, and I join them at the same time.
Wonderful. How do you go about crafting an artist statement? What's the process?
It's a daily process.
Okay.
We can write one today, and change it tomorrow, change it a week from now. I changed that one that I just gave you maybe a month ago. So it's an ongoing process. But the most important thing, and the best answer to your question primarily, is you don't have to come up with an artist statement today or in a month that's perfect. It's the process of starting by asking those questions and continually asking them, who you are, what you do, what you believe in. Because all those things can change. For example, you might want to be a principal player in a major orchestra, and that's your career goal. But along the way, you decide, I'd really like to be a soloist. And so then your artist statement changes. There's an old cliche that I've never liked, but I like it now, and it's not the destination, it's the journey. And it's so true here. If you're always asking, what is it that I believe in? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I love what I'm doing? And that really puts you on a course. So I think one way to start is to ask, what really moves you? What really gets you going? What is it that you love that you don't need any assistance getting started? What do you believe in? And then I think it goes from there. What is exciting you right now? And it goes from there. And then you can start asking, well, this is what gets me going, but why is that? What do I believe in? What do I want to accomplish? It's not an easy process. But again, going over it, daily or weekly or monthly, you'll ultimately come up with something that you can start using as a very powerful template for what you want to achieve.
A lot of what you just talked about sounds like a very internal process of reflection and asking questions internally. But the question of impact and audience and music being an art form that we share with an audience is external. How does the world or the audience or the scope of impact come into crafting an artist statement?
Well, the second most important question besides why is, who is your audience?
Okay.
Who is the audience you want to reach? Or how do you add new fans, new listeners to your audience? Or maybe you want to go in a different direction in terms of the audience you want to serve. So I think that's one thing that's also a part of your template. But what this really comes down to is something that Andrew Useley said in the very first session. And by the way, I recommend everyone, if you haven't heard that first session, you go back. Because in the very first 3 minutes, he said just about everything I believe in. Everyone has a story to tell. What's yours? We are in the storytelling business. And that's what you need to find out. I think it begins with your artist statement. But again, what sets you apart? What sets you above all the rest? And how do you make that come to be? So storytelling, especially when you are trying to connect with the media and influencers, and I guess influencers would be presenters, managers, agents, bookers, and other people. Maybe they run a venue or they run a chamber music series. How do you connect with them? Of course, they're going to want to know about all the things you've accomplished and the awards you've received and the impressive people that you've played with, but they also want to know something a little bit personal about you. So everyone has a story to tell, and find that story and then find the best way to communicate it. Just sorry to go on and on, but the last thing is, we have discussions every day about how do we in classical music connect with audiences? How do we rid ourselves of those barriers, those unnecessary barriers? And I maintain it's not singles night at the symphony, it's not Beethoven's brews and brats, it's telling a story, letting the audience know that you have a story, it's personal, it's authentic to you, and that that connects you with that audience. It's not just about your virtuosity, which they can never achieve, but they can relate to your personal story. And it could be a happy story, a poignant story, uplifting. It could be funny as hell. But convey that story to your audience, and you'll make very strong connections.
When I think about, Bach or Mozart, there isn't necessarily a program or a story that accompanies the music. So can you expand that a little bit more? What is a story that a classical musician who spent a life in the practice room might have to tell? And how does that relate to playing Bach or Mozart on stage?
That's a very tough question. Let me start by saying there's a well-known pianist from Russia, and her parents sacrificed everything, and I do mean everything, to bring her to the United States so that she could study at Juilliard with two incredibly strong and influential teachers. And her parents sacrificed everything to make that happen, including leaving home. Mm-hmm. So you think of three Russian citizens now all living in America. And when she tells that story, and it's incredibly poignant, and she's told it to me twice, and each time you can hear her just slightly break down and need to control herself. And so when she's playing, that sacrifice of her parents is in her body, in her fiber of everything she does. Can I point to how it shows up in her music? Absolutely not. But when I hear her performance, I hear someone who has a story as well. So that would be one way to answer it. But the other thing is, I maintain there is a story. There almost always is a story with a piece of music that one can find. And interestingly enough, it can be your own personal story, like why you play it this way, how it moves you, why you put it on the CD, why you included it with other contrasting works on a CD, on your new CD. So it can be the composer's story, it can be the story of the music, or it can be our own story and why we're moved by this piece and what we want you to get out of it.
You mentioned this earlier, but I want to dig a little deeper. How has an artist statement influenced your professional life as a creative advisor and advocate for musicians and ensembles?
Well, first of all, I live my artist statement every day. I love what I'm doing, and in fact, I'm doing it right now. I'm talking to an artist and an artistic leader who I value. I think we share many important philosophies. So in a sense, I'm living that right now. But at the beginning of the day, it comes down to me looking at a performer that I'm working with or an ensemble and finding out how can I get their story out? How can I connect them with the media? How can I help them find their priorities? And I don't determine them. I just push them to say, you have these 5 projects. 2 of them are your passion projects, and the others are things that you're going to have to do. How do you want to implement that? What can be the strategy for making that happen? But I think it's also just continually probing them to say, what is the most important thing for you in your career right now? What is it that you need? And so I try to be as focused as possible with them, and I think that puts them into a very expressive, contemplative thinking mode where they can make those determinations of their priorities and the timeline.
You mentioned that a good artist statement will help you make decisions in your everyday life. Expand on that. Let's say it's not yourself, it's another artist. How does this guide your time, your priorities, productivity?
Well, I was speaking to the class of composers at the Curtis Institute, And one of the things we talked about is if you want to be the principal trombone player of a major orchestra, then it's very clear the things that you need to do. You need to work on repertoire. You need to work on performing without stopping, and playing within an ensemble of brass players and making a perfect blend. And that, I would think, would make your career choices, and not your career choices, but your day-to-day decision-making process and focus very clear. And then someone raised their hand and said, well, wait, to do that, don't I need to be a complete musician? And so, of course, she was right. And so, I've changed my thinking, obviously, on that. But I think it helps for you to know on a regular basis that this is what I'm working for, and that will keep you, I think that will keep you on track. I'm not sure I answered your question.
That's a good answer. I think it also, at least for me, when you go through your day, there are activities that are sort of inspiring and exciting, and then there are activities which sometimes seem tedious or not as engaging. But if you have that vision for where your life is going, the impact you're hoping to create, and you see those different pieces working towards those goals, at least for myself, the day becomes in service of that larger vision.
Yeah, I mean, I call what you're describing the curse of the long tone, the curse of the scales by thirds. Those things, they're just as important, not just as, but they're very important to the trombone player, learning the repertoire, preparing for auditions, playing without stopping. So, yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of things. Now, you can live your artist statement all day, but that doesn't mean you can't have fun or take time away from it. In fact, almost everyone knows that some of the greatest improvements they make as an artist is when they're not playing, when they're away from their instrument or away from their ensemble. And amazing ideas can still come at that time because you're, in a sense, already on that path. So they can whip in and out at any time.
When you talk about how everyone has a story to tell, can you talk about how that actually informs some nuts and bolts activities like creating a website and writing a bio?
Once a year, hopefully twice a year, people update their resume. And they look back at all the things they have accomplished that they maybe have forgotten. And so when you have a story to tell, and you think about what that story is, I think that can shape how you create the content on your website, how you create your artist statement, and how you create content for all the things that you post online or in other, materials that you send out. I ask people, so that I think there are 3 or 4 very important things on every resume. One is the artist statement, and the other is your bio. And so I would ask you, is your bio an impressive list of accomplishments, awards, people you studied with, the people you have played with, the exciting and influential venues where you've performed? Or is it a story? Now, the presenters, they want all the accomplishments that they think is going to help sell people to buy tickets or a series. But I think it's a good idea to have 2 bios, a long bio, which is actually a medium bio, that highlights the best of your accomplishments and achievements and things that you've got going on, but also tells something about your story. Something that is compelling and interesting and memorable, or funny. So that will connect you to the media, that will connect you to your current and future audiences, if they know that, well, he or she is an amazing performer and can play the Gershwin concerto like nobody's business, but they're also about this or that. They've spent time somewhere. They like rafting. They like stinky cheese, like me.
How does an artist statement support publicity and engaging with the media?
So I'm going to tell you something that a good portion of our little world hates when I say this, and that is, no one reads press releases anymore. Now what? Just briefly, the press release for many years was sort of like the fertile ground that you would use to get the word out. And they were very often long and tedious, sometimes single-spaced, no story, just facts and figures, no heart nor soul. No heart, no soul. And then think about the average journalist who receives 50 pitches a day. Now, when I was at SiriusXM, I would receive between 50 to 60 press releases every week and 20 to 30 CDs every week. And I wanted to listen to everything. I wanted to read everything, but that's impossible. And it's the same case for people working in the media. It's the same case for radio program directors and influencers who are always being pitched. So how do you stand out? And it's a little bit of a formula, but how do you get people's attention knowing that they are getting 50 similar requests or pitches as yours? And the first thing is your subject line. If you can create something that jumps out, it could be funny, mysterious, it could be serious, but it has to, in a sense, tell a little bit of a story. So if your press release subject line says, David Srebnik's new piano concerto receives its world premiere this weekend at Symphony Hall, I can promise you that no one will open up that press release. What's interesting about that, I get this a million times. If you can say in the subject line why it might be of interest, say this piano concerto is dedicated to the first responders in your community or other areas of either social or political concern, then you're automatically standing out. In my experience, most press releases just had facts, and if I didn't know if it said Gil Shaham, well, then I would definitely open that. I don't need anything. But if it's David Srebnik, who's he? So that's one way. Another way is to not send press releases, but to send something in 3 or 4 sentences that tells what's going on and tells the brief story, about it, and hopefully generates a lot of interest. There's a PR person that I love and admire. Her name is Katie Solomon. And I steal this from her. I don't really send out press releases at all, but what she does is she puts the very important information at the top of her press release, and then within 1 or 2 lines, you have an option to click on something to hear what she is pitching. And just by doing that, I can find out, is this something for me? Yes. Then I read on and get more information. If it's not for me, I politely delete it. So if you can keep your press release to 3 or 4 sentences and get to the music immediately, then you stand a very good. First of all, you'll stand out from everyone else, and in a sense, you're giving the receiver a hand. You're making it very easy for them to determine early on whether you're in or you're out. And if they're in, then there's the bottom half of that press release page and page 2, where they can get more information. But grab them at the very beginning, because again, they're getting at least 50 in a week, and I'm sure the New York Times is getting 50 a day. So how will you connect with people who are overworked, underpaid, understaffed, and there aren't enough time, there aren't enough hours in the day for the work they do?
It reminds me of reading so many bios over the years of young musicians, and it's very clear right away who has a compelling, interesting story or personality to share, and they get it front and center. Somehow, maybe it's through a photo they've chosen or the first 2 lines of a bio. I also think that it comes through clearly when it is authentic, and when it's not authentic, I think that actually is also something you can tell rather quickly. But it's fascinating when I'm grabbed by something quickly, when I'm being introduced to an artist for the very first time.
Listeners know, the audience knows immediately if you're not being authentic. Mm-hmm. And then you're dead. They can tell when someone is committed to what they're doing. And so it's very important to know what your story is and to be yourself. And you're not giving away too much information. It's not a case of, TMI. It's a case of I'm sharing something that's important to me that may or may not have 100% to do with the music I'm performing, but it's a part of who I am. I mentioned Gil Shaham earlier. He was on the phone with Madison Square Garden trying to get Knicks tickets, and he was on hold, and he was hearing this beautiful piece of music with a beautiful violin solo, and he didn't know the piece, he didn't know who was playing, and he thought, here I am, a professional violinist, and I don't know this piece. So he bought his tickets, and then he kept calling back to listen to it on hold. And weeks later, he found out that it was the famous melody, the poignant melody from Schindler's List, and the violinist was Itzhak Perlman. So if I knew that story, if that was the story in the first couple of lines, for example, he recorded it, so when you're sending out your not press release, that could be something that could be near the top. It's funny, it's unusual, but there's also a certain amount of poignancy and emotion connected with that story. And it's unexpected.
In this next segment, David has invited 2 guests to discuss how they crafted artist statements and how that artist statement has functioned or worked in their lives. The 2 guests include Ian Saunders, a double bass player who is currently Assistant Dean for Artistic and Social Change at the Longy School of Music. The other guest is Will Pyle, a saxophonist from the Aruna Quartet. We thank both of them for joining us today.
So Ian and Will, thanks for being here. It's good to see both of you, and I appreciate your being part of the process. Let's start with you, Ian. We actually were in the same room at the same time, in the same city, in the same state, but we didn't meet, but we have since talked a number of times. You put in a lot of effort and time and thought into your artist statement. Why did you invest so much of yourself into the process?
Yeah, I remember being in that room and coming to that meeting at Sphinx Connect, and it was something that sort of struck me where I hadn't really sat down and put pen to paper, and during that process, I got into this sort of routine. I was heavily on the audition circuit for orchestral jobs and like that, and using orchestral audition to define you as an artist is a recipe for being depressed. You don't want to do that. But getting a chance to I really wanted to just get back in touch with that end, right? Like technique and all those things is a means to an end. And so it's just an orchestral audition isn't an end, it is a means to an end. And I just wanted to touch base and really understand where I was coming from, how I've grown and things like that. And so when I had the chance to actually sit down and write and see it, sort of come to life, then I started to realize a lot of this reflection that was always kind of there, actively influencing my art and my music, that I never necessarily codified for myself. And in doing that, in many ways, that helped me become a better artist, that helped me more so understand, what I was doing, all this music making for, and the things that I really loved and appreciated. And that just brought it so much closer, which was really something that was so important for me during COVID, when there were no orchestra concerts, there were no orchestra auditions. But, I had such a strong sense of who I was as an artist from working on the artist statement that, that really powered me through as an artist through, that difficult time.
Was it a struggle for you? Could you briefly describe the process, the work process of doing it? And through that struggle, at any time, did you hate my guts?
It was a struggle in the beginning, because I think when I was first writing it down, I kind of fell into I was writing down all the things I achieved, like I did this and I did that and I did this, and things that might not necessarily connect with anybody except who might be, a part of those competitions. So having to sit down and say, like, well, what is it that you love? And no one ever asked me, why do I love it? Right. That's kind of like the question that you get the first day when you start playing music. But as you become a professional, sitting down and really figuring out why you love that. So that was the tricky part, allowing myself to say, like, I love this, about playing the bass. I love this about sitting in an orchestra. Is funny because, yeah, the tricky part was just allowing myself to say those things out loud.
Yeah, I think, again, part of this is you'll never get your perfect artist statement. Hopefully you'll work on it, once a week or once a month. But it's the process, the taking of the steps. And as you said, no one had ever asked you, what is it that you love?
Yep.
And so when you answer that, I think that's another good starting point. Well, hello again.
Hi.
We met as part of the Acropolis Reed Quintet Mastermind Series last summer. At the time when we met, your group was pretty much at the crossroads. And I don't want to suggest in any way that you were lost and struggling, but you certainly realized that something had to happen to propel you forward, to reach not only your musical goals, but your outreach goals, which are pretty significant. Where were you all at that point? And then how did the process of the artist statement work for you?
Well, I kind of resonated with what Ian was saying, because we had like just come off the competition circuit. We were all we felt we were playing really well together, and we're like, okay, we've been successful and we love making music together. But as far as like the path forward, like, okay, what's next? We had no idea. We had no kind of concrete plans other than just to play music. And it was kind of scary for us, because as a group, we're like, okay, we're going to be moving kind of apart. Like, how are we going to keep this together if we, don't know what we're doing? And so we met you through the Acropolis program, and you had a lot of very succinct criticisms of kind of what we presented on our website and what we were about. And a lot of it was like, okay, we get it, you guys are good, but like, what do you want to do? What are you saying? And I think that through thinking about what we really were trying to say, and like what do we really value as a group. And um, arriving at the exact words was almost less important than like us really kind of getting in deep conversations with each other, like, okay, like what are we really gonna be? Like, are we just gonna be a group that plays gigs in the summer? Are we just gonna be a group that does concerts at schools? Like really, who are we? um and that process was super foundational to where we are today, and how we feel so much better about, like, okay, we know things are still uncertain, but going forward we at least have some idea of like, this is the direction we're aiming. So it's been really, really, really helpful.
I would like to invite everyone to look at the Aruna Quartet website. It's very easy to read, it's clear, it's powerful. And in a sense, our work together was, I'm not sure what came first, your website or your artist statement, but how did the artist statement change or improve your website?
Well, I think the artist statement in many ways, like, kind of is the website, essentially. Like we tried to start with the artist statement, and that took a little bit longer than we anticipated, of us really, really working together. Um, and I'm sure it's even difficult as an individual, but as a group, it was very hard to kind of work out, like, let's all agree on stuff, and let's all kind of be on the exact same page about who we are. And then once we had the artist statement, we tried to structure everything on our website to be related to the artist statement. And if it wasn't related to the artist statement, we're like, okay, let's just remove it. Like, it doesn't need to be there right now.
Yeah, that's so incredible. It makes you a good editor. I like to say that a good artist statement makes it easy for you to decide when to say yes and when to say no. Do I want to take this gig for free? It's for a good cause, or no. Do I want to practice long tones today, or am I going to blow that off? But it makes it very clear what your path is. So thank you for saying that. Everyone is dying to know, if you will please read your current artist statement, and let's just start with you.
Okay, so this is on behalf of not me, but on the Aruna Quartet.
Right.
Oh, we are a Texas-based chamber ensemble whose mission is to cultivate curiosity through inclusive presentation of contemporary and traditional music in intimate performances and interactive educational programs.
Isn't it interesting that you didn't use the word saxophone, which in some cases I would say that's not a good idea, but in your very first sentence, you make it very clear that you are music makers, and it just happens to be saxophone. So good on you. Ian?
Yeah, so this is my artist statement as of today. It is always a work in progress, and as David said, editing is artistry as well. So what I have is music is a way that we can make sense of the world and ourselves, how we struggle, how we love, how we live. Music gives voice to our experiences and emotions and can bring us a closer understanding of how others experience the world. I love instrumental music's ability to set ideas and nuances of diverse artistic beauties and aesthetics across time and space into a universal language accessible by all. As a performer, my priority is to build community around this art form and to ensure everyone can enjoy access to instrumental music's full range of personal, emotional, and expressive capabilities.
That's deep. I remember that well. Not to put anyone on the spot, but the artist statement can also be what you say to someone who's of influence when you happen to be in the elevator at the same time, and you have 30 seconds to, have have a relationship that might only last 30 seconds, or maybe it'll last 60 seconds, or maybe it will be ongoing. So one of the things I would recommend to each of you is that you have that 30-second version, and you actually practice saying it out loud, so that when you meet Gustavo Dudamel in line at Starbucks, you know exactly what you're going to say to him. So, Ian, you are relatively new, and I should say you are Dr. Saunders, Dr. Ian Saunders, at the Longy School at Bard Music. How has the artist statement, well, how did it help you in the application process? I'm sure there were many interviews. And then how are you using it now that you're on the job?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I currently work there as the assistant dean of artistic and social change. And there were many rounds of interviews, but in each interview, they asked me, well, what drives you to make art in the first place? Because at Longy, there's a big belief in being able to describe that and creating art for purpose and changing the world, or how you want to do that. And around that time, we were actually working on the artist statement. So I was constantly working on this artist statement in order to fully be authentic. And I got an actual note later that said that the reason why I sort of stood out was because of being authentic and describing why my art was so personal to me, and how I wanted to make a change. And, you know, how I think the beauty about having an artist statement is when you describe it to someone, they can say, yep, I can see how they're going to do that. You know, I can see how they're actually going to do that in the world. And so that's a very big thing that I sort of use to curate concerts with students at Longy as well. Part of my job is helping students put together concerts and events and things like that. And before we even curate a concert, we think like, what's the purpose of this? What will this fulfill? You know, and then so they all kind of have a individual artist statement, and then collectively they kind of think of one in order to curate a concert together. And we've done that actually very successfully with our orchestra program there. So that's been how I've used it to get to where I am, and how I continue to use it as the dean, helping students to kind of figure out how they want to think about their artistry.
And Will, let me present one or two scenarios where you might use your artist statement. Let's take the most basic one. You're rehearsing, and maybe you are trying to make sure that you're all aligned when it comes to the interpretation and the meaning of the music, and your personal understanding of the music and your story. How might the artist statement show up, if at all, in that moment in time?
That's an interesting question. I think that I'll say that sometimes, you know, if it's when we're rehearsing, obviously it's good to, you know, in the details, trying to work out very minute things, but I think it may help when we're trying to zoom out, you know, like, okay, on the program, where is this piece? Where does it come? What comes after this piece? Like, what comes before this piece? What exactly are we trying to evoke here? Because a big part of what the artist statement is that we want to create curiosity in the audience. We want them to kind of like ask questions like, okay, well, you know, even why are these two pieces next to each other? Like, they did this on purpose, and why? And if there's any way we can say like, okay, well, this piece just came after a very emotional, heavy piece. How do we start this next piece? You know, is that going to influence our interpretation? So even in the details, I think it is helpful to kind of have a really large overview. And how the artist statement comes into that, that's a very interesting question.
I suppose it's maybe under the surface, But for example, if you're all sitting around and talking about writing a grant and the narrative for the grant or other strategic planning, then maybe it shows up a little bit more forcefully at that moment.
Yeah, definitely.
So we are just almost out of time. I want to thank you both for being part of this. Is any final word or last word on the subject?
Doing this has been really, really important for us. And I just want to emphasize that again. And if you're writing an artist statement, it's often very easy for us at least, to get cut off on every word. So we're like, okay, we need a different word. You're pulling out the thesaurus and you're like, okay, what's the word? But it's not necessarily about having the most perfect, beautiful, polished sentence. I think that it's the process of doing it. And for us, it's really been about like, okay, let's throw out everything we don't love and we don't want to do and doesn't impact the world in the way we want to impact the world. And let's keep the stuff that we really love and the impact we really want to make. And then we have to put it into words, which is like almost the hard part. But the important part is the first part of it, I think.
To add to that, or to second that, it is about the process. It isn't so much getting, stuck on a word or like trying to find perfection and that way. I think it's the process of going through it allows such a great amount of reflection that you are sort of in touch with yourself on a consistent basis, that I think one would be surprised to learn that it changes, and being able to sort of track that and see that in an artist statement, you see how you interface with your art, how that art interfaces with the world, and how that changes in the world contextualized by it. So I think that's the great thing about working on an artist statement as well.
And we should say, as difficult as the process is or was for you two, no musicians or instruments were harmed in the process. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned you had an artist statement you still wanted to share with us. What is it?
I do. The last question that I encourage people to answer is, what do you love? And I was always a little bit embarrassed to say that. It sounds maybe a little bit new agey or, I don't know, not genuine. But I've come to learn that it's really the most important question, in the sense that no one has ever asked that. No one has ever asked, well, what is it that you love? And so that's a very important thing to make sure to consider. I was giving a talk to some performers, and I asked them to write their own artist statement, just on the fly, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I noticed there was one guy not writing anything, but just kind of had a pained thing. And so I asked him, what's going on? It's okay if you're struggling, and these are difficult questions, but he said, I just don't know what to write, and I just don't know where to start. And I asked him, well, what do you love? And I have it word for word, so forgive me for reading. He paused, and then he said, I love cartoons. Cartoons were an important part of my childhood. I loved the colors, the action, the humor, the slapstick, and I loved the music. So I incorporate my love for all of those things in my own music, especially the joy they created for me during my childhood. When the audience hears my music, they might not hear cartoons, but they will hear the energy, the melodrama, and wide range of moods that all good cartoons merge seamlessly. And maybe in some way, my music might well evoke their own personal childhood memories. I hope so.
Thank you for the conversation today. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
I have a website called All Art Is Personal, one word, allartispersonal.com. I have an email address that is David, M as in Michael, Srebnik @gmail.com. And I encourage any or everyone to drop me a line, and we can take this, we can continue the dialogue in a way that's personal to them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, David, Will, and Ian, for the conversation. Next Tuesday, I'm going to give a talk about money and the working musician. Who doesn't love a good discussion about money? I hope you'll come back and join us next week.